Okay, so we've got this equip function that will check if our character is valid and take care of attaching it to the socket and everything. And we also, if you'll recall, in main.h we have this equipped weapon variable, and in the weapon class, what I'd like to do is set this equipped weapon variable equal to the weapon that is being attached. So what we can do is we can just under attaching it, we can say char, and we can say set equipped weapon. That's the setter we created. And inside of this, we can pass in this, and that will set the equipped weapon to this particular weapon instance. Okay, so we've got that. Let's compile this. And one thing I want you to notice is when we overlap with the item, we automatically pick up that item. And that is an okay mechanic, but it's kind of taking the choice away from the player. I mean, basically, if you're a player and you're playing a game and you already have a weapon you like, and you see another weapon and you don't necessarily want to pick it up and equip it, usually games give you the opportunity to choose. And what I'd like to do is have the ability to, as soon as we overlap with the item, then maybe have the choice of being able to click the left mouse button, for example, and then equip it in that case. And so to do that, I would like to have our character have a variable for the item that it's overlapping with, and then be able to equip it based on like a mouse click or something like that. So let's go back to main, and we'll have a equipped weapon variable, but I'd also like to have a variable for the active overlapping item or weapon. And this can be of type A item, because basically in the future you may wish to overlap with other types of things you can equip as well, maybe some armor or something like that. And so instead of making this a weapon, I'm going to make this a item. So let's forward declare a item and call this active overlapping item. And I'm going to make this a U property of the same type of, basically with the same markers as the weapon U property. And I'm also going to create a setter for this as well, called set active overlapping item. So let's do that, set active overlapping item. And this will take an A item and call this instead item to set, or simply item. And we can say active overlapping item equals item. And so this will set our active overlapping item. Okay, so we've got the setter for that. Okay, so we really don't want to equip as soon as we overlap, so we could take that out of the weapon CPP. So instead of setting the equipped weapon here as soon as we overlap, we can not call equip from on overlap begin. We can call that from some other function. So let's go ahead and take this out. And so now on overlap begin shouldn't do anything other than set our active overlapping item. So actually, instead of deleting all of this, I can just delete the equip function. And we can say that in here, we can say main set active overlapping item, and we can pass in this, because this weapon class is derived from item, so this should actually work. Okay, so we have this setting the active overlapping item. We also on overlap end would like to do the same thing, only instead of setting the overlapping item to this, we're going to set it to null pointer, so that way as soon as we stop overlapping with it, if we haven't equipped it yet, then we can simply no longer have an active overlapping item on the character. So all right, that is looking good. Now let's do some additional mechanics to this. For example, as soon as I equip this weapon, I would like to play a sound for equipping. So let's add an additional sound variable, and I'm going to forward declare a uSoundQ. And uSoundQ in this case will be called onEquipSound. So this is different than just overlapping with it. This will be for actually equipping the weapon. And so let's make this a U property, and I want this to be edit anywhere, blueprint, read, write, and I want it to have the category of, let's make this in the, let's put it in an item category and a subcategory for sound. And so for on-equip sound, we'll basically select that in the blueprint. Now in the CPP, because we're going to be using a sound cue, we're going to need to include the header file for that. And this was in sound slash, and it's going to be soundcue.h. So we've included that. And we're going to go to the equip function. And in the equip function, I would like to play a sound. So as soon as we, attach everything, I'm going to take this and put it just under the if statement here, and we're going to play a sound. Now the sound playing capabilities is in gameplay statics. So let's go back up here and include, and recall that this was in Kismet / gameplay statics.h. So in equip, just under the if statement, I'm going to say if, and we're going to check if on equip sound is valid. If so, then we can simply call the uGameplay static function play sound 2D. And this takes a world context object. We can pass in this, and then finally a uSound base, which on equip sound is based off of. So we can pass in on equip sound. And that should play our sound if it's set on our weapon. So that should work just fine. Okay, so now what we need is to basically add some functionality for actually equipping this, and I would like to use the left mouse button. So I'm going to compile this, and while that's compiling, I'm going to go back to the first project. I'm going to go up to Edit and Project Settings, and I'm going to go into Inputs, and what I'd like to do is do another action mapping, and I'm going to call this LMB for left mouse button. And I'm calling it that because left mouse button is going to do various things. It's going to pick up an item such as a sword, but also if we have a weapon equipped, it's going to attack and things like that. So let's call this LMB, and let's bind it to the left mouse button. So we'll go to mouse and look for left mouse button. There it is, and we can close and save. Now let's go back to first project, and in our main character H file, and I'm going to close some of these because we're not using all of them. So I'd like to right click on here and choose close all but this. And so we have the main.h, and up here with our move forward, move right, turn, and all of these, I'm going to put another function to add to our collection here, and I'm going to call this a void function LMB down. I'm going to also create a void LMB up, and above these I'm going to create a bool called BLMB down, and these are pretty self-explanatory. I'm going to hit Control KO to switch to the main.cpp, and in the constructor I'm just going to put right here next to shift key down, I'm going to put BLMB down equals false by default. And then I'm going to go to main and copy these two functions. I'm going to paste them down here under, let's find our last movement function. I think it would be lookup at rate. Just under that, I'm going to paste these two. I'm going to put a main : before both names, and I'm going to give them both function bodies. And just like you probably expected, all these are going to do is set the BLMB down boolean equal to true in the LMB down case and false in the LMB up case. and that should give us a Boolean to use for function logic. So that takes care of the functions that we'll use, and now we need to bind the Lmb axis, or action mapping rather, and we'll do that in setup player input component. Here it is. And so we've got jump, we've got sprint, and now we finally can add one for the left mouse button. So let's paste these and use Lmb for the binding, and we're going to call the Lmb down for Lmb pressed, and Lmb up for released, and that should take care of that. Okay, so now in Lmb down, we're going to actually put some functionality for equipping the weapon. So let's go back to Lmb down. I'm going to Control F, Lmb down, and here in the function, of course we need to set the Boolean to true, but then we're also going to check to see if we're overlapping with an item. So we're going to say if active overlapping item, and we're going to basically cast this to a weapon, and of course we need to include the weapon at the top. So let's do that, include weapon.h, and I'm going to Control F, type in Lmb down, and search down to the function, and I'm going to say create an A weapon called weapon, set it equal to cast to a weapon, and pass in, and what I'm going to pass in is active overlapping item. See, active overlapping item is an A item, so we need to cast it to a weapon. If that cast is successful, then we can check if weapon. If that cast succeeds, then we can go to the weapon call equip, and equip will take a main. That will be this, because we are on the main class. So we can call equip with this, and that should actually allow us to attach the weapon to our hand, to the hand socket, and so on. And so that should work. So why don't we compile this and give it a test? Okay, so we've compiled it. We can go back in the editor, and we can go over to the weapon, and it looks like it's not equipping on overlap, so that's good. We can hit Shift F1, and we can go to main BP, and in the details panel we can type active, and it looks like active overlapping item isn't showing up. So let's go back to first we'll hit escape first, go back to first project and into main.h, and let's look at active overlapping item, and it looks like we have edit defaults only, which it doesn't seem to be visible on an instance, right? So we need to say let's make this actually visible anywhere is what I'd like to do, because I'm not really going to need to set it from a blueprint or from the defaults. We're setting it when we overlap with the item. So let's make it visible anywhere, and that way we can take a look at the instance during gameplay and debug it. Compiled successfully. Now we can hit play, and I can hit actually Shift F1 and click on main BP, and now we see active overlapping item, and it's set to none by default. If we overlap, now you'll see it's set to weapon BP. That's that particular instance. And if we stop overlapping, it will set it back to none. So it's back to null pointer basically. Now if we go ahead and click, then we've equipped the item, but you'll see that active overlapping item is still set to weapon BP, and that's because we haven't set it to null. So what we need to do is go back to weapon.cpp. So let's go to weapon.cpp, and in the equip function, what we can do is as soon as we set equipped weapon to this, we need to set the active overlapping item to null. And in fact, that's something that might be better done in main in the LMB down, basically if active overlapping item and if weapon, then we equip. Then under that, we can say set active overlapping item, and we can set it to null pointer. And so that way we can build that and test it. That way, when we equip something, then we will no longer have active overlapping items set, because that is no longer relevant. So let's actually, let's go ahead and hit play and click on main, because we got main here. And active overlapping item is none. It's set to weapon when we're overlapping, and then when we equip, it's set to none again. So that way we can overlap with other items. So in the future, when you have like weapons or other armor, things like that, then active overlapping item will be set. Okay, so that looks pretty good. Now, another thing you'll notice is that this sword, this weapon, is based off of the item type. So if we go and we select it in the world, and we come over here to the details panel and we type particle, then you'll see that we got the idle particles particle component. And if we set the template to this, to something such as, oh, I don't know, we can do fire, and actually I'm going to type p_fire, and I'm going to just choose p_fire here. And you'll see that we've got this particle system component. We can actually drag it up let's see, we can go to the weapon BP, and we can go to the full blueprint editor in the viewport, and we can click on idle particles component and drag it up. That way it's in the weapon, it's up here towards the end of the blade. Compile that and go back, and you'll see that this fire we chose for our weapon here is there on the weapon. And if we hit play and we go and equip this, you'll see that we still got the particles on the weapon. Now that may be what you want, and it may not. And what I'd like to do is set the option to have that either stay or have it go away as soon as we equip. And so to do that, what I'd like to do is go back into the weapon.h, and in weapon.h, I'm going to have a weapon particles property, and that will be basically a boolean. So let's go down here, let's go just under a weapon and do a bool b weapon particles. And I definitely want this to be something that you can edit anywhere and blueprint read write. So let's do that. And in the category, it's going to be item particles. Okay, so this B weapon particles, by default, we should set it to a value. I'm going to set it to false by default. So in the weapon constructor, B weapon particles equals false. And then in our equip function, when we pick it up, then we can check to see if weapon particles is true or false. So we're going to do a if statement here, and going to say if not B weapon particles, or B weapon particle rather. If not B weapon particle, then we're going to say idle particle component. That's the idle particles component. We can deactivate it. So now if we, oh, and also it's giving an error because we need to include the header file for the particle system component, and that is going to be an include of particles slash particle system component. And there's the error. So particle system component .h. And now we should be able to go ahead and compile this. Actually, it looks like B weapon particles is undefined, and that's because I called it B weapon particle, I believe. Just so everything's consistent, I'm going to call this B weapon particles here, and then in equip, we want to use B weapon particles with an S. So I'm going to go ahead and compile that. and we should now have the capability to check this checkbox on the blueprint that says you want to keep the particles going or you want to deactivate it upon equipping. So let that compile and go back to the editor. And so we have this with the flames here, and we can go to the weapon particles and click the checkbox, so that will keep the particles there in this case. And then we can drag in another weapon here, and for here in the particles template for the idle particles component, we can choose another one. Let's choose like just like a treasure loop, and we'll do the gold sparkle loop. And this one we may not want to keep as soon as we equip it, so we're going to keep the weapon particles unchecked on that one. I'm going to click Save All, and I'm going to click Play, and I'm going to go over here to this particular weapon, and you'll see the particles showing up, and as soon as I equip, then the particle system goes away just like we wanted. But if I hit play and come over here to the fire sword and equip that, because that checkbox was checked, the particles stay, and so now we have the opportunity to set that parameter and decide whether we want the particles to stay or to go away. So that is all good. Okay, so we're going to click save, and let's call this a stopping point, and in the next video we will continue our functionality for our weapon.